on Long Island. He is on the Homeland Security Committee and is chairman of the subcommittee on counterterrorism and intelligence. Congressman, this toll took such a terrible toll this day in your district. Constituents, friends, people you grew up with. And for us as New Yorkers, as we've said, this is real. It is here. It is now. You're reminded of the people you know. Rich, his son-in-law was killed. Christy, her husband. You go by a house. You know the father never came home. Your thoughts on Islamic terrorism and what this day means?
First of all, Eric, thank you for having me on the show. And I agree with everything you said before. You know, this began in 1990. Maybe on 9/11/01, we had an excuse not to be ready. We didn't fully appreciate it all. But there's no excuse today. This is the same war going on today as the war that began back in 1990. And the same people who carried out the attacks on September 11th are still active and are still coming after us today. And my concern is that too many Americans put 9/11 in the category of Pearl Harbor or Gettysburg, you know, some bit of ancient history that happened a long time ago. The fact is the threat is every bit as real today. And while we may have had an excuse on 9/11, there's no excuses today. And every American and every member of Congress should realize that we can never, ever let our guard down, and we can't fall into political correctness. We have to realize the enemy is Islamic Jihad, and they are as dedicated now and as diabolical now as they ever were, in some cases even more so.
As you say, for us it is very real. I'm sure almost every day you meet a family member or someone you know who was impacted directly by this. You see the fire engines go by. They've got the names on the doors of those who died. You go to the supermarket. You go by the firehouse with their photos. For those across the country who are watching, who were not here, who do not know anyone who was killed that day, what do you say to them to say that this continues, it is now, and this threat of Islamic Jihad is very real?
Yeah, when you have it in your own neighborhood with your own friends, your own neighbors, your own constituents, and you continue to see it, I mean, 13 years later, you still see the traumatic effect it's had on these families, the devastation, because they can never have a private grieving. It will always be public, and the whole world will be looking at them. And nobody in any city in America should ever have to go through that. So that's why it's so important that, you know, those of us who are from New York, who saw it firsthand, that we stand together and let the rest of the country know this is not a New York issue. This is an American issue. It happened to New York. It just easily could happen in any other major city or area in the country. We may be the #1 target, but to the Islamists, all Americans are the enemy. So everyone should realize that, and we should never let our guard down and never forget the sacrifices that the men and women made on 9/11.
And Congressman, last night during President Obama's speech, by my count, he mentioned the words terrorist, terrorism, or terrorizes 18 times. He did not say Islamic terrorism. He said ISIL is not Islamic, it is not a state, it is a terrorist organization, pure and simple. How do we defeat this philosophy? Is he right? What do we do about this philosophy that kills Theo Van Gogh in Amsterdam, for example, or attacks the Westgate Mall in Nairobi? How do we stop them?
We have to identify the enemy. You can't defeat the enemy unless you identify the enemy. And the enemy is a distorted version of Islam, but it does come from Islam. And the overwhelming majority of good Muslims have to speak out, and we can't be politically correct and ignore who the enemy is. I think nobody was more articulate on this than Joe Lieberman, who constantly said, if you don't identify the enemy, you're not going to be able to defeat the enemy. And, you know, this is not a group of Catholics or Protestants or Jews. This happens to be Muslims. And I would say, as an Irish Catholic, if there were Catholics, any kind of Catholics who are dedicated to killing people, I as a Catholic have a special obligation to denounce them, and I would want people to know where they were coming from, to make it clear that they are an isolated group within our faith. But I found, like, for instance, last night the president went out of his way to say the Islamic State is not really Islamic because they couldn't be murderers. Don't be so defensive. Don't be so politically correct. Identify the enemy, go after the enemy, kill the enemy, and that's what we have to do. We can't have this thing of reaching out the hand of friendship or thinking we can negotiate or thinking somehow this is just some extremist group that has a grievance. No, this is a group of vicious, evil, diabolical people who want to destroy everyone who does not share their twisted view of the world.
And we are now watching the very poignant and vivid results of that. These emotional pictures, the tears and tributes now ongoing, the human toll that these people have suffered, that this country has suffered, and that you have personally suffered. Congressman Pete King of Long Island, New York, we thank you so much for joining us on this.
Eric, thank you. And again, thanks for the great job you do in alerting people to this constant danger. Thank you.